I sat at the family dinner table I had been paying for in the house I bought with my own money, listening to my mother tell me that my unemployed brother, Tyler, had done more for us than I ever will. The words hit like a physical blow to my chest. I stared down at my plate, then glanced toward my briefcase by the door, where mortgage papers sat with my name on them, utility bills addressed to me, and credit card statements showing years of supporting this family. Tonight, everything was about to change. Tonight, I would stop being their invisible safety net and start being their unavoidable reality check. The moment those words left my mother's lips, my mind raced back to how this whole nightmare began. I was 14 when I got my first job bagging groceries at the local supermarket, not because I wanted spending money like other kids, but because our electricity had been shut off twice that year. While my classmates worried about homework and video games, I was calculating whether my $12 per hour could cover our overdue water bill. My parents, Frank and Linda, had a talent for financial disaster that bordered on artistry. Dad bounced between construction jobs never lasting more than 6 months anywhere because showing up on time apparently violated his personal philosophy. Mom claimed various mysterious ailments that prevented her from working, though she had remarkable energy for shopping trips when someone else was paying. Meanwhile, my brother Tyler, 2 years older than me, had perfected the art of professional unemployment by age 16. I put myself through college while working full-time at a warehouse loading trucks from midnight to 6 in the morning, then attending classes during the day. My hands were permanently stained with cardboard dust, and my back ached constantly, but I graduated with a computer science degree and landed a software development position at 22. Most people my age were celebrating their freedom, but I was calculating how much of my $50,000 starting salary I could spare to keep my family afloat. The first major sacrifice came when I was 23. I had saved $8,000 for a security deposit on my own apartment, finally ready to start my adult life. Then Dad got fired again for arguing with his supervisor, and our landlord served an eviction notice. I handed over every penny of my apartment fund to prevent my parents from becoming homeless, then watched them spend the following weekend at a casino. My girlfriend Sarah started voicing concerns about my family situation early in our relationship. She would watch me work overtime every weekend, then hand my paycheck to people who had never thanked me for a single sacrifice. When I got promoted to senior developer with an $85,000 salary, she begged me to finally put myself first. Instead, I started house hunting for my parents. The decision to buy them a house felt logical at the time. Rent was money down the drain, and my parents had destroyed their credit so thoroughly that they could not qualify for a loan if their lives depended on it. I spent 2 years living on ramen noodles and sleeping on an air mattress, saving every possible penny for a down payment. The house I found was a modest 3-bedroom ranch in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy but safe and comfortable. I remember the day we signed the papers, how proud my parents looked as they walked through their new home. Dad immediately claimed the largest bedroom, and Mom started planning where to put her extensive collection of decorative plates. Tyler moved in the next week, taking over the finished basement without asking. I drove back to my studio apartment that night, exhausted and broke, but convinced I had done the right thing. The gratitude lasted exactly 3 weeks. Then the first mortgage payment came due, and suddenly it was not a generous gift, but an expected obligation. When I mentioned that maybe they could contribute something toward utilities, Mom reminded me that I was the one who wanted to buy the house. When I suggested Tyler could help with groceries since he was living there rent-free, Dad explained that family takes care of family. What I discovered next changed everything. At a family barbecue, I overheard Tyler talking to our neighbor about the house purchase. He was describing how he had helped choose the property, how he had contributed money for the down payment, and how he was listed as a co-signer on the mortgage. Every word was a complete lie, but Tyler delivered it with such conviction that even I started questioning my memory. Our neighbor congratulated him on being such a responsible son. While I stood there holding a plate of food I had paid for in a yard, I was making payments on feeling completely invisible. The worst part was not Tyler's lies, but how easily everyone believed them. In their version of reality, Tyler was the successful son who took care of his parents while I was just the guy who worked too much and never visited enough. The foundation of everything I had built was cracking, and I was the only one who could see it happening. Confronting Tyler about his lies was like arguing with a politician. He had an excuse for every contradiction, a story for every inconsistency, and a way of making me feel crazy for questioning him. When I brought up his false claims about contributing to the house, he smiled and said he contributed emotional support, which was just as valuable as money. When I pointed out that his name was nowhere on any legal documents, he accused me of trying to take all the credit for something we accomplished together. But what really drove me insane was how my parents defended him. When I showed them bank statements proving I had paid every penny for the house, Mom shook her head sadly and said I should not be keeping track of family favors. When I explained that Tyler had never contributed a single dollar to anything, Dad reminded me that Tyler had other gifts besides money. Apparently being charming and telling jokes was equivalent to working 60-hour weeks. The deeper I dug into Tyler's activities, the more disturbed I became. Those expensive tools I had bought Dad for Christmas, Tyler sold them at a pawn shop 2 weeks later. The jewelry I gave Mom for her birthday, gone traded for cash that somehow evaporated without explanation. Tyler had turned my generosity into his personal ATM, and my parents either did not notice or did not care. The favoritism was suffocating. When Tyler moved in with his girlfriend, Jessica, Mom would drive over with home-cooked meals 3 times a week. When I worked late and missed dinner, I got lectures about not making time for family. Tyler received birthday parties, graduation celebrations for things he never finished, and constant praise for basic human functions like showering regularly. I received criticism for working too much, suggestions that I needed to learn work-life balance, and reminders that money was not everything. My expenses had grown beyond just the mortgage and utilities. There were medical bills when Dad hurt his back and refused to file workers' compensation. Car repairs when Mom crashed into a mailbox because she was texting while driving. Emergency grocery runs when they spent their food budget on cigarettes and lottery tickets. And Tyler's endless crises, each one requiring immediate financial intervention to prevent some imaginary catastrophe. Sarah gave me an ultimatum on a Tuesday evening in March. We were sitting in my tiny apartment eating takeout Chinese food that cost more than I usually spent on a week of groceries when she placed an envelope on the table. Inside were apartment listings for places we could afford together if I stopped funding my family's lifestyle. She gave me 6 months to set boundaries, or she would move forward without me. I tried implementing rules. $50 per month from my parents for utilities seemed reasonable. Tyler contributing something for food since he lived there rent-free felt fair. The reaction was swift and brutal. Mom cried, claiming I was punishing them for being poor. Dad accused me of becoming selfish since my promotion. Tyler organized a family meeting where he presented a slideshow about how my demands were tearing the family apart. Jessica announced her pregnancy at Sunday dinner, and immediately the conversation turned to baby preparations. Not one person asked if Tyler had a job to support a child. Instead, they started discussing how much baby supplies cost and wondering aloud who might be able to help with expenses. Tyler beamed like he had accomplished something remarkable, while I realized I was about to become financially responsible for another human being I had no part in creating. The holiday hosting duties fell to me automatically. Thanksgiving dinner for 12 relatives, Christmas gifts for everyone, Easter brunch with all the trimmings. Tyler would show up empty-handed, accept compliments on how well organized everything was, and take credit for family traditions he had never planned or paid for. I would work overtime for weeks to afford these gatherings, then listen to Tyler give toasts about the importance of family, while I calculated whether I could afford my own rent next month. My hidden struggles were pathetic. I ate ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches while my parents enjoyed steaks I bought them. I postponed dental work to cover Tyler's rent when he got evicted for the third time. I wore the same winter coat for 4 years, while Tyler updated his wardrobe seasonally with money he borrowed and never repaid. The credit card discovery was my breaking point. I found statements for 3 different cards opened in my parents' name at their address, each maxed out with purchases I had never seen. Designer purses for mom, power tools for dad, and restaurant charges that happened while I was working late. The minimum payments were automatically charged to my bank account, something Tyler had helpfully arranged since he knew my login information from all the times he had used my computer. But the final straw came when I was sorting through mail at their house and found credit card applications addressed to me. Applications that had been opened, filled out, and submitted. Tyler had been intercepting my mail for months, using my information to open accounts with their address as the billing location. $12,000 in debt had been accumulated in my name for purchases I knew nothing about. Tyler had been living a lifestyle funded by my stolen identity, and when I confronted him, he acted like I was overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. The manipulation was so complete, so systematic, that I started questioning my own sanity. Was I really being selfish for wanting them to contribute something? Was I wrong to expect Tyler to work like every other adult? The gaslighting was professional, grade designed to make me doubt my perceptions and accept their version of reality. But the numbers in my bank account did not lie, and neither did the collection agencies calling about debts I had never agreed to take on. That Sunday in late September arrived with the kind of crisp fall air that usually filled me with optimism. I had just finished a weekend of overtime work debugging a complex software issue that had earned me praise from management and a $500 bonus. For once, I felt like celebrating, so I stopped at the expensive grocery store and bought ingredients for Mom's favorite dinner, herb-crusted salmon roasted vegetables, and that ridiculously overpriced wine she liked. I should have known something was wrong when I walked into the house and found Tyler wearing a suit. Not just any suit, but a brand new navy blue outfit with a silk tie and leather shoes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He was sitting at the head of the dining table like some kind of patriarch, gesturing dramatically, while telling a story to our Aunt Martha, who had driven down from Albany for an unexpected visit. The table was set with Mom's good china, the stuff she usually reserved for Christmas, or when she wanted to impress someone important. Candles flickered in the center, creating warm shadows on the walls of the dining room I was still paying to heat. Dad had even changed out of his usual stained t-shirt into a button-down shirt, though he had missed several buttons, and his hair looked like he had finger-combed it 30 seconds before I arrived. Tyler was in the middle of describing some business opportunity he was supposedly pursuing, using words like synergy and market penetration with the confidence of someone who had never actually worked in business. Aunt Martha was nodding along, impressed by his apparent sophistication, while Mom beamed with pride at her successful son. I set the grocery bags on the kitchen counter and started unpacking ingredients that had cost me $93 money I had earned by working until midnight the previous Friday. The conversation continued through dinner preparation with Tyler holding court while I cooked. He talked about networking opportunities and potential partnerships, painting himself as an entrepreneur on the verge of breakthrough success. When Aunt Martha asked about his current job, Tyler smoothly deflected by discussing how traditional employment was becoming obsolete and forward-thinking people were creating their own opportunities. Jessica arrived halfway through my cooking, wearing a dress that showed off her growing baby bump and a diamond bracelet I had never seen before. She kissed Tyler like he was a returning war hero, then settled into the conversation about their upcoming wedding plans. Apparently, they had booked a venue, hired a photographer, and ordered flowers without mentioning any of these decisions to the person who would presumably be expected to fund them. Dinner conversation started pleasantly enough with Aunt Martha asking about everyone's lives and careers. Tyler dominated the discussion, describing his various projects and future plans with the enthusiasm of someone announcing a cure for cancer. When she asked about me, the conversation shifted noticeably. Mom mentioned that I worked in computers, Dad added that I worked too much, and Tyler suggested that I needed to learn better work-life balance. The first warning sign came when Jessica announced their engagement, officially producing a ring that must have cost several $1,000s. The table erupted in congratulations and excitement with immediate discussions about wedding planning. Mom started talking about reception venues and catering options. Dad mentioned how proud he was of Tyler for stepping up and taking responsibility, and Aunt Martha gushed about how romantic the whole situation was. I made the mistake of mentioning that I had been thinking about buying my own house, now that I had been promoted and could finally afford a down payment. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees instantly. Mom's smile faded. Dad stopped chewing and Tyler set down his fork with theatrical precision. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Aunt Martha asked if that meant I was abandoning my responsibilities to the family. Mom recovered first, explaining patiently that family obligations came before personal desires. She reminded me that Dad was getting older and might need more help soon, that the house required ongoing maintenance and repairs, and that Tyler was about to become a father who would need support during this transition. Dad nodded along, adding that a man's character was measured by how he took care of his family, not by how much stuff he accumulated for himself. Tyler's response was masterful manipulation disguised as concern. He talked about how important it was to maintain family unity, especially with a baby coming. He mentioned how much our parents had sacrificed for us growing up, and how it was our turn to give back. He painted my desire for independence as selfishness, my wish for my own space as abandonment, and my need for financial boundaries as greed. The conversation spiraled quickly. Aunt Martha started sharing stories about other family members who had drifted away after achieving success, cautionary tales about people who forgot their roots and ended up alone. Mom became emotional, talking about how she had always dreamed of having her family close together, and how my moving out would break her heart. Dad grew increasingly agitated, declaring that a real man put family before himself, and that maybe college had filled my head with selfish ideas. Then Tyler delivered his masterstroke. He started listing all the things he had done for the family, describing in detail every contribution he claimed to have made. The house purchase, where he had supposedly helped with research and paperwork. The utility bills, which he claimed to manage and coordinate. The holiday celebrations, which he took full credit for organizing. The ongoing financial support, which he described as a shared responsibility that we handled together. Aunt Martha listened with growing admiration, occasionally glancing at me with what looked like disappointment. Mom and Dad nodded along with Tyler's recitation, confirming details and adding their own praise for his dedication. I sat there in stunned silence, watching my brother take credit for years of my sacrifice while rewriting history in real time. When I tried to correct the record, pointing out that Tyler had never paid for anything or contributed financially, the reaction was swift and coordinated. Tyler acted hurt that I would try to diminish his contributions. Mom reminded me that not everything valuable could be measured in dollars. Dad accused me of trying to take all the credit for family success. Aunt Martha looked confused, clearly trying to reconcile two different versions of reality. But the final blow came when I asked Mom directly to tell me one specific thing Tyler had done financially for the family in the past year. Just one concrete example of his contribution. She looked me straight in the eye, her voice steady and confident, and said that Tyler had done more for them than I ever will. Not financially, she clarified, but in ways that really mattered. Tyler knew how to make them feel loved and appreciated, while I just threw money at problems and expected gratitude. The words hit me like a physical assault. I felt my chest tighten, my breathing shallow, my vision blur slightly around the edges. 5 years of 60-hour work weeks. $150,000 of my own money. Every vacation day spent working on their house, every weekend sacrificed to their emergencies, every personal dream postponed for their comfort. And in their minds, Tyler's occasional phone calls and charming dinner conversation outweighed all of it. I excused myself from the table, mumbling something about needing air, and walked out to my car. My hands were shaking as I sat in their driveway staring at the house I had bought, thinking about the mortgage payment due in 6 days and the utility bills that would arrive with my name on them. For the first time in 5 years, I wondered what would happen if I simply stopped. What would happen if Tyler's contributions had to cover the actual expenses instead of just the emotional labor he claimed was so valuable? That night, sitting in my studio apartment, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being invisible, done being taken for granted, done sacrificing my future for people who could not even acknowledge my past. Tyler wanted credit for supporting the family perfect. It was time to give him the opportunity to prove just how much he could actually contribute. I called in sick to work Monday morning, something I had never done, unless I was genuinely ill. Instead of heading to the office, I drove to the downtown law firm, where my college roommate Jake worked as a paralegal. I had helped Jake through organic chemistry when he was pre-med before he switched to law, and he owed me more favors than either of us could count. More importantly, he understood family dysfunction in ways that most people could not comprehend. Jake listened to my story without interruption, occasionally taking notes on a legal pad that he filled with bullet points and question marks. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and whistled softly through his teeth. He had handled dozens of family law cases, but he said mine was uniquely complicated because I had voluntarily created the financial dependency without any legal protections for myself. The research phase took 3 days. Jake explained property transfer laws, utility account regulations, and the legal requirements for removing yourself from financial obligations you had voluntarily assumed. The good news was that I had every right to transfer the property deed to my parents and remove my name from utility accounts. The bad news was that the mortgage would remain my responsibility unless my parents could qualify to refinance, which we both knew was impossible given their credit history and employment record. But Jake found a solution I had not considered. Since my parents had been living in the house as their primary residence for over 2 years, and since I had never claimed it as my primary residence for tax purposes, I could transfer the deed to them while maintaining the mortgage obligation. This would make them responsible for property taxes, maintenance insurance, and all future financial decisions about the house, while I remained liable only for the monthly mortgage payment that I was already making. The utility changes were straightforward, but required careful timing. Electric, gas, water, and internet services could all be transferred to my parents' names with 24 hours notice, but I had to ensure they were notified of the changes and given opportunity to establish payment methods. Jake helped me draft formal letters to each utility company requesting account transfers and removal of my automatic payment authorizations. I spent Tuesday evening gathering documentation, 5 years of bank statements, mortgage payment records, utility bills, and credit card statements, showing exactly how much I had spent supporting my family. The total was staggering even to me. $163,000 over 5 years, not including the $20,000 down payment for the house. I had essentially funded a small business without receiving any ownership stake or decision-making authority. Wednesday. I met with a notary to execute the deed transfer documents. The house would officially become my parents' property, giving them complete control over renovations, selling decisions, and future financial obligations. I kept copies of everything, but the original deed transfer would be filed with the county recorder's office that afternoon. Sarah came over Wednesday night, and I showed her all the paperwork spread across my kitchen table. She had been patient through 5 years of my family drama, watching me sacrifice every personal goal for people who treated me like an ATM. When she saw the deed transfer documents, she started crying with relief. We had talked about marriage, about buying our own house, about starting our family, but none of it had seemed possible while I was supporting 3 adults who should have been supporting themselves. Thursday morning, I called each utility company and authorized the account transfers. Electric service would switch to my parents' names Friday at noon. Gas service would transfer Friday afternoon. Water and sewer would change over Friday evening. Internet and cable would disconnect from my account Friday night unless they established new service. I removed my automatic payment methods and confirmed that all future bills would be sent to my parents' address. The bank account changes were more complex. I had automatic payments set up for their mortgage car insurance and credit cards that Tyler had opened in my name. I canceled all automatic transfers and closed my checking account, opening a new one at a different bank to prevent any unauthorized access. Tyler knew my login information for online banking, and I was not taking any chances with his financial creativity. I wrote a letter explaining my decision, detailing every expense I had covered and every sacrifice I had made. The letter was 4 pages long, professional, but emotional, laying out the facts without attacking anyone personally. I explained that I needed to focus on my own future, that I believed they were capable of handling their own finances, and that I would always love them, but could no longer enable their dependence. Sarah and I found an apartment that afternoon, a 2-bedroom place with hardwood floors and a kitchen where we could cook together. The security deposit and first month's rent totaled $2,800 money I could afford because I was no longer covering someone else's mortgage. We signed the lease and planned to move in over the weekend. But my investigation into Tyler's activities revealed something that changed everything. While cleaning out my emails to remove any family-related automatic payments, I discovered loan applications in my inbox that I had never seen before. Pre-approval letters from banks, credit line offers, and business loan applications all addressed to me, but forwarded from my parents' address. Tyler had not only been stealing my mail, but using my credit to apply for business funding. The loan applications were sophisticated, listing the house as collateral and claiming that I was starting a landscaping business with Tyler as my partner. He had forged my signature on preliminary documents and listed himself as co-applicant for a $75,000 business loan. If the loan had been approved, Tyler would have access to the money while I remained legally responsible for repayment. Jake reviewed the loan documents and confirmed that Tyler had committed multiple felonies, identity theft, mail fraud, and attempted wire fraud. The applications were sophisticated enough to suggest that Tyler had help from someone with financial experience, possibly Jessica or one of her family members. This was not just family dysfunction, but actual criminal activity that could have destroyed my credit and left me liable for debts I never agreed to take on. Friday morning, I drove to my parents' house for the last time as their financial provider. The deed transfer had been processed, the utility changes would take effect within hours, and my automatic payments had been canceled. Tyler's car was in the driveway, a detail that would make the day's revelations even more dramatic. I had one final conversation to have, and then I was done being their safety net. As I walked up to the front door carrying copies of the loan applications Tyler had submitted in my name, I felt something I had not experienced in years: complete control over my own life. Whatever happened next, I would face it as an independent adult, rather than as an enabler trapped in a cycle of family dysfunction. The next few hours would determine whether my family could function without me, or whether they would collapse under the weight of responsibilities they had avoided for so long. Either way, I was finally free to find out who Kenny could become when he was not busy being everyone else's solution to their problems. Friday at 7:30 in the morning, my phone started ringing. I was in my new apartment with Sarah, unpacking dishes we had bought together with money I had earned and saved when Mom's contact photo appeared on my screen. I let it go to voicemail, then watched as Tyler's number appeared immediately after. Then Dad's number, then Mom again. By 8 o'clock, I had 13 missed calls, and my voicemail box was full. The first message was Mom's voice, high-pitched and panicked, asking why the electricity had been shut off. The second was Tyler, angry and demanding that I call him back immediately. The third was Dad, confused about why the mortgage company had sent paperwork about the deed transfer. They escalated from there, growing more desperate and accusatory with each unanswered call. I was stirring pancake batter when the 27th call came in. Sarah answered this time, her voice calm but firm, as she explained that I was unavailable, but would return calls when convenient. She listened for a moment, then hung up and looked at me with raised eyebrows. Apparently, Tyler had threatened to drive over and break down our door if I did not answer my phone within the hour. But I was done with their emergencies being my crisis. I continued making breakfast, then drove to work for the first time in 5 years, without checking my bank balance or worrying about automatic payments. My new checking account had enough money to cover my own expenses with a growing balance that represented freedom rather than obligation. The reality at their house was swift and unforgiving. They had never paid a utility bill themselves, never called to set up service, never dealt with deposits or payment arrangements. When the electricity shut off at noon, they discovered that the electric company required a $400 deposit to establish new service in Dad's name money they simply did not have. They called 3 relatives, asking for loans before noon turned to afternoon. Tyler's fury was nuclear. He drove to my office building and demanded that security call me down to the lobby. When I refused to leave my desk, he waited in the parking lot until 5 o'clock, then followed my car home while calling me every name he could think of through his open window. His financial desperation was absolute because his entire lifestyle had depended on access to my credit and bank accounts. By Wednesday of the first week, the water had been shut off for non-payment. My parents had never established utility accounts in their names, and the companies required deposits they could not afford. Dad was forced to shower at the gym, where he worked part-time, while Mom carried buckets of water from their neighbor Mrs. Peterson's garden hose. Tyler and Jessica moved back into Tyler's old apartment, but within days, they were fighting constantly about money and responsibility. The neighbors began learning the truth about our family dynamics. Mrs. Peterson had always wondered how my unemployed parents could afford such a nice house, and when she saw them carrying water buckets and eating by candlelight, the pieces fell into place. Other neighbors started asking questions, and the story of Tyler's supposed financial contributions began falling apart under scrutiny. Jessica left Tyler on the 4th day. She had tolerated his unemployment when she thought his family supported him, but the reality of dating someone with no income and no prospects was too much when she was pregnant and needed stability. She moved back in with her sister, leaving Tyler completely alone for the first time in his adult life. Dad managed to keep his part-time construction job, but his 24-hour work week at $15 per hour generated less than $500 weekly before taxes. Mom applied for retail positions, but discovered that having no work history at age 48 made her essentially unemployable. Their monthly expenses for mortgage, utilities, food, and basic necessities totaled over $2,800, while their combined income was less than $2,000. The manipulation attempt started immediately. Mom called crying about medical emergencies that required immediate financial assistance. Dad left voicemails about how hurt and betrayed he felt how family was supposed to stick together through difficult times. Tyler showed up at my apartment building multiple times, sometimes drunk, sometimes just desperate, always demanding that I fix the situation I had created. But the most revealing moment came when Aunt Martha called me directly. She had heard about the utility shutoffs and wanted to understand what was happening. When I explained that I had simply stopped paying my parents' bills and transferred financial responsibility back to them, she was confused. She asked why they could not afford their own expenses, why Tyler was not contributing to household costs, and why I had been paying for everything in the first place. Her questions forced me to realize how completely my family had hidden the truth from everyone around them. Extended family members, neighbors, and friends all believed that my parents were financially stable and that Tyler was a contributing member of society. The carefully constructed facade was crumbling now that the actual numbers were visible. Tyler's desperation led him to increasingly poor decisions. He started borrowing money from high-interest payday loan companies, using Mom's car as collateral. He applied for credit cards with predatory terms, accumulating debt at 28% interest rates. He even tried selling furniture from the house until Dad pointed out that Tyler no longer owned any of it, since the deed was in their names. By the weekend, my parents were eating cereal for dinner and heating water on a camping stove borrowed from their neighbor. The house that I had bought to give them security and comfort had become a monument to their financial helplessness. Without my automatic payments, they were forced to confront the actual cost of the lifestyle they had taken for granted for 5 years. The breakthrough came when Mrs. Peterson knocked on their door with information about social services and financial assistance programs. She had researched options for low-income families and brought them applications for utility assistance food stamps and emergency housing funds. But every program required documentation of income expenses and efforts to become self-sufficient. For the first time in years, my parents were forced to honestly assess their financial situation. Dad would need to work full-time to generate enough income for basic expenses. Mom would need to find employment, even entry-level work, to contribute to household costs. Tyler would need to move out and support himself, rather than living as a dependent adult in his parents' house. The week that followed would test whether they could adapt to reality or continue living in denial. Either way, I was no longer available as their financial solution. They would succeed or fail based on their own efforts, and for the first time in 5 years, that felt exactly like justice. The second week began with what I can only describe as psychological warfare. Mom showed up at my office on Monday morning claiming she was having chest pains and needed me to drive her to the hospital immediately. She had taken 2 buses and walked 4 blocks to reach my building, demonstrating remarkable stamina for someone supposedly experiencing cardiac distress. But I called an ambulance anyway, then followed it to the hospital to ensure she received proper care. The emergency room doctor found nothing wrong with her heart, though he noted elevated blood pressure consistent with stress and anxiety. While we waited for her discharge paperwork, Mom grabbed my hand and begged me to reconsider my decision. She promised things would be different, claimed they had learned their lesson, and swore they would pay me back every penny if I would just resume the utility payments. The tears were real, but so was the manipulation behind them. Tuesday brought a coordinated assault from extended family members. Uncle Robert called to lecture me about family loyalty. Cousin Jennifer sent a Facebook message about how disappointed my grandmother would be if she were still alive. Aunt Martha drove down from Albany for an impromptu intervention, bringing photo albums from my childhood to remind me of everything my parents had done for me over the years. But Jake had prepared me for this phase. Family manipulation tactics follow predictable patterns, and guilt-based pressure campaigns typically intensify before they collapse. I listened politely to each lecture, thanked them for their concern, and explained that I had made a mature decision to encourage my parents' independence rather than enabling their dependence. The word enabling confused most of them, since they had never considered that possibility. Tyler's approach was more direct. He waited outside my apartment building Wednesday night, intercepting me as I returned from grocery shopping. His appearance was shocking, unshaven, wearing the same clothes for multiple days, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who had not slept properly in a week. His desperation was palpable, but so was his rage at being forced to face consequences for the first time in his adult life. He started with threats, claiming he would tell everyone what a selfish person I really was. Then he shifted to bargaining, offering to get a job and contribute to household expenses if I would just restore the utility payments. Finally, he broke down completely, admitting that he had no idea how to be a functional adult and begging me to teach him how to manage money and find employment. That moment of vulnerability was the first honest thing Tyler had said to me in years. I offered to help him develop job-searching skills and create a budget, but I made clear that financial bailouts were no longer available. He would need to learn responsibility the way every other adult did through experience consequences and personal growth. Tyler listened to my offer, then called me a self-righteous hypocrite, and stormed away. Thursday brought news that changed everything. Mrs. Peterson called to report that police had been to my parents' house, asking questions about Tyler's activities in the neighborhood. Apparently, several elderly residents had paid Tyler for home improvement projects that were never completed. The amounts were significant: $3,000 for a roof repair, $1,500 for driveway sealing, $2,000 for basement waterproofing. Tyler had collected the money and disappeared, leaving seniors with damaged property and empty bank accounts. The investigation revealed a pattern of financial predation, targeting vulnerable neighbors. Tyler had presented himself as a legitimate contractor, complete with business cards and references that were completely fictional. He had used the house I bought as proof of his success and stability, leveraging my investment to build credibility for his scams. The total theft exceeded $12,000, and multiple victims were pressing charges. When Tyler was arrested Friday morning, the local newspaper ran a story about the contractor fraud case. My parents' address was listed as Tyler's residence, and the article mentioned that several victims had been impressed by his family's apparent financial success. Reading that story, I realized how completely Tyler had monetized my generosity, using it as a foundation for criminal activity. Mom called me from the police station sobbing and begging me to post Tyler's bail. The amount was $15,000 money she seemed to think I should provide, as naturally as breathing. When I declined, she became hysterical, screaming that I was abandoning family when they needed me most. Dad got on the phone and accused me of causing Tyler's arrest by creating the financial pressure that forced him to desperate measures. The logic was breathtaking. Somehow Tyler's decision to steal from elderly neighbors was my fault because I had stopped paying his living expenses. In their minds, criminal fraud was a reasonable response to being expected to support himself, like every other adult in America. They were more angry at me for creating accountability than they were at Tyler for stealing from vulnerable seniors. Jessica returned Tyler's belongings to my parents' house that weekend, along with a letter explaining that she could not raise a child with someone who had no moral compass. She was keeping the engagement ring, which she planned to sell to help cover prenatal expenses. Tyler would need to prove he could maintain employment and stay out of legal trouble if he wanted any relationship with their child after birth. The weekend brought my parents' first genuine crisis without me as their solution. They had no money for Tyler's legal fees, no credit to secure loans, and no assets they could sell. Dad picked up additional construction shifts, working 60 hours that week for the first time in years. Mom applied for every entry-level job within walking distance of their house, finally accepting a position at a grocery store for minimum wage. Sunday evening, I received a call that surprised me. It was from Mrs. Peterson, who wanted to thank me for finally forcing my family to face reality. She explained that Tyler's fraud scheme had been enabled by their comfortable lifestyle, which made neighbors trust his claims about being a successful contractor. By removing my financial support, I had inadvertently protected other potential victims from Tyler's escalating criminal behavior. That conversation helped me understand something important. My enabling had not just hurt me and my family, it had created conditions for Tyler to harm other people. By refusing to maintain the facade of success that Tyler used to commit fraud, I was protecting the community as well as myself. The guilt I felt about my parents' struggles was replaced by clarity about the necessity of my decision. Monday morning brought the most unexpected development yet. A bankruptcy attorney called asking if I was related to Tyler Harrison. Apparently, Tyler had tried to file for bankruptcy protection while listing me as a creditor for $60,000 in family loans. He claimed I had lent him money for various business ventures and that his inability to repay me had caused his financial collapse. Even facing criminal charges, Tyler was still trying to manipulate the system using my name and reputation. The fourth day of the second week marked a turning point. My parents finally accepted that I was not going to rescue them, and they began making adult decisions about their situation. Dad arranged payment plans for utility deposits using his construction wages to gradually restore basic services. Mom completed her first full week of employment, earning her first paycheck in over 15 years. They were learning to live within their means, and while it was difficult, it was also dignifying in ways they had never experienced. Tyler remained in jail, unable to make bail, and facing multiple felony charges. His arrest had revealed the full extent of his financial crimes, including the loan applications he had submitted using my identity. Federal charges for wire fraud and identity theft were pending, and his public defender recommended pleading guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. The golden child who had done more for the family than I ever would was looking at 6 months in county jail, followed by years of probation and restitution payments. As the week ended, I felt something I had not experienced in years, genuine hope for my family's future. Not because they were comfortable or successful, but because they were finally learning to be responsible. The crisis I had created by removing my financial support was forcing them to develop life skills they should have learned decades earlier. It was painful to watch, but it was also necessary for all of us to move forward as healthy adults. 1 month after I removed my financial support, the transformation was remarkable. Dad had not missed a single day of work, earning him praise from his supervisor and a small raise. Mom completed her training program at the grocery store and was offered additional hours in the deli department. They were living paycheck to paycheck, but they were living on their own earnings for the first time in over a decade. Tyler served 6 months in county jail, during which time he was required to attend financial literacy and job skills training programs. The experience forced him to confront the reality of his situation without family enablers or manipulation tactics to fall back on. He emerged with basic employment skills and a court-ordered restitution plan that would take years to complete, but also with something he had never possessed before: humility. The house that I had bought became truly theirs in ways that went beyond legal ownership. They learned to manage utilities, handle minor repairs, and budget for unexpected expenses. Mom started a small garden in the backyard, providing vegetables that reduced their grocery costs while giving her a sense of accomplishment. Dad built shelves in the garage, organizing tools he had purchased with his own money, rather than items given to him. Sarah and I thrived in our new apartment, cooking meals together and planning a future that seemed achievable for the first time. I had proposed to her with an engagement ring I bought using money I saved by establishing healthy boundaries with my family. She said yes, not just to marriage, but to the version of myself that had finally learned to prioritize our relationship over dysfunctional family dynamics. The family dinners that resumed 2 months later were completely different. Everyone contributed something. Dad grilled burgers he had purchased with his wages. Mom prepared side dishes using vegetables from her garden, and Tyler brought dessert from the bakery, where he found employment after his release. I contributed wine and good conversation, but not money, and somehow the meals felt more meaningful than any of the expensive gatherings I had funded in the past. Tyler's relationship with Jessica slowly rebuilt as he demonstrated consistent employment and responsible behavior. He moved into a small apartment that he could afford with his bakery wages, furnished it with items from thrift stores, and invited Jessica to visit once he had maintained stable housing for 3 months. Their daughter was born healthy, and Tyler's first act as a father was opening a savings account with $50 he had earned and saved himself. The extended family members who had criticized my decision were forced to acknowledge that it had produced positive results. Aunt Martha admitted that she had never seen my parents so proud of their accomplishments, even though those accomplishments were modest by external standards. Uncle Robert conceded that learning to support themselves had given Mom and Dad a dignity they had never possessed when they depended on my charity. My relationship with my parents evolved into something healthier than it had ever been. They expressed genuine gratitude for my past support while taking responsibility for their current situation. Mom showed me her first paycheck with the same pride she had once reserved for Tyler's empty promises. Dad invited me to see the deck he was building using materials he had saved up to purchase over several months. The most significant change was in how they talked about money and responsibility. Instead of expecting others to solve their problems, they discussed strategies for managing expenses and increasing income. Instead of viewing work as an unfair burden, they found satisfaction in earning their own way. Instead of taking comfort for granted, they appreciated basic necessities they had once demanded from others. Tyler's transformation was the most dramatic. Jail had forced him to confront his behavior without enablers or excuses. The job training programs taught him practical skills, while the restitution requirements provided ongoing accountability. He began attending community college classes in the evenings, working toward a degree in business administration that would help him understand the legitimate side of the financial world he had previously tried to manipulate. Sarah and I bought our own house 18 months later, a modest 3-bedroom home with a yard where we could start our own family. The down payment came from money I had saved by maintaining healthy boundaries, and the mortgage was affordable because I was only responsible for my own expenses. My parents visited often, bringing groceries they had purchased and offering to help with yard work they completed themselves. The wedding planning process revealed how much our family dynamics had changed. Instead of expecting me to fund an elaborate celebration, Tyler and Jessica planned a modest ceremony within their budget. Instead of assuming I would cover expenses, my parents offered to contribute what they could afford. Instead of taking my generosity for granted, everyone expressed appreciation for what I chose to give, rather than demanding what they felt entitled to receive. Our daughter was born 3 years later, and both sets of grandparents were present for her birth. But the dynamic was completely different from what it would have been during my enabling phase. My parents brought gifts they had saved to purchase. Tyler offered to babysit without expecting payment, and everyone understood that this child would grow up seeing healthy examples of financial responsibility and mutual respect. The life lessons from this experience extended far beyond money management. I learned that love does not require sacrifice of your own well-being, that helping others sometimes means allowing them to face consequences, and that enabling dysfunction is fundamentally different from providing genuine support. My parents learned that self-sufficiency brings dignity, that work provides purpose as well as income, and that relationships are stronger when based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. Tyler learned that manipulation tactics eventually fail, that genuine success requires consistent effort, and that taking responsibility for his actions was more satisfying than avoiding them. Jessica learned to evaluate partners based on character rather than promises, while our daughter would grow up understanding that financial responsibility is a basic adult skill rather than an optional burden. The house I bought became a symbol of transformation rather than enabling. My parents took pride in maintaining it with their own efforts, improving it with their own savings, and sharing it with family members who contributed to gatherings rather than simply consuming them. The deed transfer that had seemed like abandonment became the foundation for their independence and self-respect. Looking back, I realized that the most loving thing I ever did for my family was refusing to continue enabling their dysfunction. The short-term pain of consequences led to long-term growth that would never have occurred if I had maintained their artificial comfort. The boundaries I established protected not just my own future, but their opportunity to develop into responsible, dignified adults. The story ends not with conflict, but with connection, not with resentment, but with respect, not with dependence, but with interdependence based on mutual contribution rather than one-sided sacrifice. We are still a family, but we are a healthier family because everyone learned to carry their own weight while supporting others through genuine cooperation rather than financial exploitation. The question I want to ask you is this: have you ever found yourself enabling someone you love, thinking you were helping them, when you might actually be preventing their growth? Sometimes the most difficult decisions lead to the most meaningful transformations, both for ourselves and for the people we care about. I want to thank you for listening to this story and for taking the time to consider how these experiences might relate to your own life. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it, and subscribe for more stories about overcoming difficult family situations. Your comments about your own experiences with family boundaries and financial enabling would mean a lot to me and to others who might be facing similar challenges. I hope this story reminds you that setting boundaries is not about punishing the people you love, but about giving everyone the opportunity to grow into their best selves. Thanks for watching, and I wish you the courage to make the difficult decisions that lead to the most meaningful transformations.